The sound of latex gloves snapping echoed like gunshots in the sterile white hallway. The monitors beeped in an unsteady rhythm, like a heartbeat losing its way. Then came the shouting. "Sir, you can't be here," a guard barked, his voice slicing through the hum of the ER. Heads turned. Nurses paused mid-step. Even the patient behind the curtain stopped moaning for a second, sensing something wrong. At the center of it all stood Mr. Lewis, the janitor. A quiet, middle-aged black man, his shoulders slightly hunched, his eyes heavy with years of unseen work. He held a mop in one hand, the handle trembling ever so slightly. He wasn't blocking anyone. He wasn't speaking. He was just standing near the double doors that led to the trauma bay, but to them, that was enough. He didn't belong there. Two guards approached fast, their radios crackling. One grabbed his arm, the other reached for his badge. "You can't be back here, old man," the first said. The tone wasn't about rules. It was about power. The mop slipped from Mr. Lewis's grip and hit the tile with a hollow clang that made everyone flinch. The nurses turned their eyes away, pretending to chart something important, pretending they didn't see the way the man's shoulders tightened. Mr. Lewis tried to speak, but the words came out soft, uncertain. "Please, let me explain." His voice trembled like a man who knew that explanations never mattered. Outside, the guard snapped, dragging him backward. The man stumbled, his shoes squeaking against the disinfected floor. "You don't belong in this area." His ID tag, still clipped to his chest, swung back and forth. "Environmental Services, Lewis M., but they didn't read it. They didn't want to. To them, he was just the janitor. Just another shadow in scrubs too faded to be respected." Inside the trauma bay, a patient screamed, a young woman's voice breaking with fear. "Please help him," she cried. The sound made Mr. Lewis flinch. He knew that voice. That was why he'd stepped forward in the first place. But he couldn't say it now. The guard's grip tightened. One shoved him against the wall, his shoulder hitting hard enough to make him wince. A nurse gasped, then looked down again, pretending to adjust a monitor. Silence thickened in the air, a silence built from years of learned fear. No one wanted to be the one to speak up for the janitor. "Sir, please," he tried again, but his words died as the guard pushed him toward the exit doors. His chest rose and fell, breath sharp with humiliation. Every step echoed his shame. The people he cleaned after every night, the doctors, the nurses, the administrators, all stood still, eyes down. To them, this wasn't violence. It was order. Then, from behind the glass of the operating room, a voice broke through. "Wait!" The shout cracked like thunder, heads snapped up. Dr. Matthews stood there, surgical mask pulled down, his blue scrubs stained with blood. He was young, confident, the kind of man who filled a room without trying. But right now, his face had gone pale. He was staring straight at Mr. Lewis. "Wait, don't touch him." Matthews stepped out fast, the doors swinging behind him. The guards froze. "That man," he said, pointing at Mr. Lewis with trembling fingers, "that man is my teacher." The hallway went still. Even the monitors seemed to pause, their beeping softening into the background. One of the guards blinked, confused. "Sir." Dr. Matthews tore off his gloves, voice rising. "You heard me, let him go." The grip loosened on Mr. Lewis's arm. He staggered forward, rubbing the spot where the guard had held him. His eyes were wide, uncertain, like someone waking from a nightmare that had turned too real. He didn't know what was happening, only that everyone was looking at him now, not with contempt, but with shock. Dr. Matthews stepped closer. "Mr. Lewis," he said, his voice dropping, I didn't know you worked here." The janitor's throat moved as he swallowed hard. "It's honest work," he said quietly, "pays the bills." The younger man shook his head in disbelief. "This man," he said, turning to the crowd, "taught me everything I know about medicine." A murmur ran through the hallway. "Back when I was just a kid, volunteering at the community clinic, he was the one who showed me how to care, not just cure." One of the nurses whispered, "Wait, him, the janitor." Matthews nodded. "Yes, him, he's the reason I'm standing here today." He turned back to Lewis, his voice softening. "You remember that day, don't you, when my mother got sick? You stayed after hours to make sure she got seen by the free clinic. You cleaned the floors, but you also cleaned wounds. You helped people even when no one paid you to. Mr. Lewis looked down, emotion flickering in his eyes. That was a long time ago, he murmured. Not long enough to forget, Matthews said. The crowd was silent, the fluorescent lights buzzing above them like judgment. One of the guards cleared his throat, trying to step back. We didn't know, sir, he was. Dr. Matthews cut him off. You didn't need asterisk to know, you just needed to treat him like a man. That sentence hung heavy in the air. A moral truth, simple yet unbearable. Mr. Lewis stood in the middle of it all, still in his faded uniform, hands trembling, the mop still lying on the floor like a broken symbol of the life they thought he lived. I was just trying to help, he whispered, voice barely audible. The woman in there, she's my neighbor. I saw her brought in, and no one would tell me if she was okay. Dr. Matthews blinked, realization dawning. You came here for her. He nodded slowly. She don't got nobody else. Her kids ain't here. I just wanted to know she was breathing. The words were so simple, so human, that they made everyone's silence sound cruel. The nurses shifted uncomfortably. The guards stepped back fully now, guilt in their eyes. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Dr. Matthews bent down, picked up the fallen mop, and handed it to him, not as a tool, but as a gesture. I'm sorry, he said quietly. You deserve better than this. Mr. Lewis looked at him, eyes glassy. No, son, you're doing what you were taught. Stand up for what's right. A heartbeat passed, then another. The crowd began to disperse, awkward and quiet, leaving only the two men in the middle of the hallway. The patient's cries behind the curtains softened into steady breathing. The surgery had gone well. Life moved on. Mr. Lewis finally smiled, a tired but proud smile. You were a good student, he said. Dr. Matthews nodded, swallowing hard. Because I had a good teacher. And in that moment, something invisible shifted in the room, a balance of dignity restored. No uniforms, no titles, just two men whose paths had crossed once more, each reminding the other that respect is not given by rank, but earned by heart. As Mr. Lewis turned back to his cart, the lights reflected off the wet floor he'd cleaned moments before. It wasn't just clean, it was redeemed. And though the world would forget this scene by morning, the lesson would echo quietly in the halls of that hospital forever. Never judge a man by the work he does, but by the heart with which he does it. Hours earlier, no one knew who Mr. Lewis really was. To them, he was just another man in scrubs that weren't hospital blue but janitor gray, the kind of gray that blended into floors, into walls, into memory. He moved quietly, his mop gliding across tile floors that gleamed like mirrors under fluorescent light. The doctors brushed past him. The nurses nodded politely, barely making eye contact. He was the man who came and went unseen, cleaning up after their long shifts, after their mistakes, after their miracles. To them, he was invisible, replaceable, small. But there was something in the way he carried himself, calm, steady, almost graceful, that didn't fit the role they gave him. Between rooms, when the halls were quiet, he would stop by a patient's door, not to eavesdrop, not to intrude, but to offer a few soft words. You're gonna be all right, he'd whisper to an old man trembling in pain. You've got more strength in you than you think, he'd tell a young mother clutching her newborn. He spoke like someone who understood suffering, who had seen it up close and still believed in better days. His words carried more healing than the medicine that dripped through the IV lines. Still behind that humble smile, the whispers hurt. They always did. Why's he always hanging around the doctor's wing? One nurse murmured to another, her tone dipped in suspicion. He should stick to cleaning, came the reply. They didn't say it loud enough for him to answer, but he heard, he always heard. Every sideways glance, every forced smile, every time someone clutched their phone a little tighter when he passed, it built a quiet ache inside him. He'd learned to live with it, to breathe through it. But that didn't mean it didn't sting. He had long since accepted that people saw uniforms before they saw faces. To them, a janitor couldn't be anything more, but he didn't need their validation. His peace came from somewhere deeper, from purpose, from knowing he still made a difference, even if they never saw it. That morning, he'd seen something that made his heart stop. A stretcher rushing through the ER doors. A woman, his neighbor, Miss Clara, pale and unresponsive. He'd known her since the neighborhood still smelled like Sunday cookouts and hope. Now she lay motionless, and no one would tell him what was happening. He'd followed quietly down the hall, praying she'd make it. That was when the guards saw him. That was when everything changed. Hours later, as Mr. Lewis sat in the break room, his mop leaning against the wall, his hands still trembled from what had happened. The memory replayed, the rough grip on his arm, the stares that burned like spotlights, the humiliation of being dragged out as if he didn't belong in the place he helped keep clean. He looked down at his palms, old and scarred, hands that had once held chalk and textbooks, now holding rags and disinfectant. Life had a way of changing uniforms, but not purpose. Meanwhile, in the operating room, Dr. Matthews was preparing for one of the toughest surgeries of his career. A trauma case, young woman, internal bleeding, every second mattered. The air was thick with tension, sterile and suffocating. The nurses stood ready, instruments lined in perfect order. Dr. Matthews took a deep breath, but the tremor in his hand betrayed him. One nurse, a veteran, noticed. "You okay, doctor?" she asked softly. He nodded, but his eyes said otherwise. He'd been here before, the edge between control and chaos, but today felt different. The patient's name echoed in his mind, Clara Jefferson. It rang familiar, though he couldn't place it. As the machines beeped steadily beside him, a memory crept in, the sound of chalk scratching on a worn-out blackboard, the faint hum of a ceiling fan that barely worked, and the voice of a man saying, "Don't let where you come from decide where you end up." That man had stood in a classroom on the city's south side, where windows were cracked and desks leaned on three legs. He wasn't rich, wasn't famous, but he believed in kids no one else did. Mr. Lewis, back then, Mr. Lewis, the science teacher, had taught them not just equations and experiments, but dignity. He fixed broken desks with tape and hope. He stayed late to help kids who failed every test believe they could still pass life. Dr. Matthews had been one of those kids. He remembered the day he almost gave up. His grades were falling. His father had left. His mother was sick. He sat in that classroom after school ready to quit. And Mr. Lewis had walked over, sat beside him and said, "You got a brain meant to build things that save lives. Don't waste it running from what scares you." Those words had planted something deep in him, a sense of worth, a direction. That moment had changed everything. And now, standing in this operating room, with sweat gathering under his gloves, he realized who that patient was, Miss Clara, the woman from his old neighborhood. Which meant, the janitor he'd seen earlier, the one the guards dragged out, that was him. Mr. Lewis, his teacher, the man who had believed in him when no one else did. The realization hit him like a rush of air sucked out of the room. He glanced at the nurses, who were watching him carefully, waiting for his command. He swallowed hard. "Scalpel," he said, steadying his hand, but inside his heart raced. He's here, he thought. He's right here in this building. Every move he made in that surgery felt heavier now. Every cut, every stitch, every breath carried the weight of the man who had once taught him to care about more than success, to care about people. He remembered sitting in that classroom, watching Mr. Lewis use an empty soda bottle to explain air pressure because the school couldn't afford real lab tools. He remembered his teacher's hands, steady and patient, guiding his. Those same hands were now scarred and shaking, pushing a mop through hospital halls. Back in the break room, Mr. Lewis sat quietly, staring at the small clock above the vending machine. The hospital was alive around him, voices, beeps, footsteps, but he was still, lost in thought, lost in what life had turned into. He didn't regret the work, but he missed being seen, missed being called *sir instead of hey you. He thought about his students, wondered if any of them still remembered him. He had no idea that one of them was saving a life just down the hall. As Dr. Matthews made his final incision, the patient's vitals stabilized. The monitor beeped in perfect rhythm again. Relief washed over him like cool water. The team sighed, but he just stood there, staring at the patient, whispering under his breath, "Thank you, Mr. Lewis." Outside the OR, the world went on as if nothing had happened. The guards still patrolled, the nurses still moved quickly between rooms, and the janitor still sat alone, unaware of how deeply his quiet life had already shaped the people around him. The same people who had dismissed him would soon see the truth. Because life has a way of turning circles, the same hands that once held chalk had shaped a doctor's steady grip. The same voice that once whispered hope would echo through an entire hospital, and the man they saw as invisible was about to become unforgettable. Some stories don't need applause. They just need time and truth to reveal who the real hero has been all along. Dr. Matthews burst through the sliding doors of the hospital lobby, still wearing his blood-stained scrubs. The sound of his shoes hitting the tile echoed through the space, fast, furious, deliberate. His chest heaved as if the weight of the entire operating room still pressed on him. "Who authorized this?" he demanded, his voice slicing through the hum of chatter and the soft blips of nearby monitors. The guards, two men who only minutes ago had dragged Mr. Lewis by the arm, froze in place. Their confidence evaporated the moment they saw the fire in the young doctor's eyes. The nurses turned, the receptionist stopped typing, and the entire lobby seemed to pause, the air thick with guilt, confusion, and something heavier that no one wanted to name. Dr. Matthews didn't wait for an answer. His voice trembled not from fear, but from a storm of emotion too tangled to hold back. "This man," he said, pointing toward Mr. Lewis, "taught me everything I know about respect, perseverance, and purpose." The words hit the walls like thunder. For a moment, no one moved, no one breathed. Mr. Lewis stood just a few feet away, his hands still resting at his sides, the faint scent of cleaning solution clinging to him. His face was calm, too calm, the kind of calm that only comes after years of swallowing humiliation without letting it turn you bitter. He didn't look at the guards. He didn't look at the nurses. He looked down at the floor he'd cleaned so many times, as if the answer to all this ugliness might be hiding somewhere between the cracks of the tile. His mop lay where it had fallen earlier, a streak of dirty water marking the spot where dignity met disrespect. He didn't say a word, but the silence that followed Dr. Matthews's outburst was louder than any apology could have been. Finally, Mr. Lewis spoke, his voice soft, steady, the kind of voice that made people lean in to hear. "I only came to see the young boy we just brought in," he said. His words were plain, but they carried a quiet ache. "He's my neighbor's son. I promised his mother I'd stay until he was safe." He didn't make excuses. He didn't plead for understanding. He simply told the truth, and somehow that truth carried more power than all the shouting that had filled that building earlier. The guards shifted uncomfortably. One scratched the back of his neck, the other glanced toward the exit, suddenly wishing he were anywhere but here. The nurses exchanged glances, eyes wide, then lowered, unable to meet his. The same people who'd watched him be dragged through those halls like he was trespassing now stared at the floor, ashamed. The shame wasn't because they'd broken a rule. It was because they'd broken something human. Dr. Matthews took a step closer to Mr. Lewis, his voice softer now but still shaking. "Mr. Lewis," he said, almost like a confession, "I had no idea you worked here." His throat tightened around the words. "If I had known, I—" Mr. Lewis interrupted gently. "It's all right, son. You got your own path now." But Matthews shook his head. "No, no, it's not all right." He turned to the crowd, his voice rising again, commanding the room like a sermon. "Without this man, I wouldn't be standing here today. I wouldn't be a doctor. I wouldn't have made it out of the neighborhood, out of the noise, out of everything that told me I'd never be enough." His voice cracked with emotion. "This man didn't just teach biology, he taught me humanity." A murmur rippled through the crowd. One nurse covered her mouth, eyes glistening. Another wiped a tear she didn't want anyone to see. Even the guards looked like boys again, stripped of their authority, standing small in the presence of something larger than themselves. Mr. Lewis didn't smile, didn't bask in the praise. He just stood there still. The calm in his eyes wasn't pride, It was something deeper. The peace of a man who had lived enough life to know that justice, when it comes, doesn't need to shout. The tension in the room began to crumble. One by one, people straightened their backs, looked at him, and for the first time really saw him. Not the uniform, not the mop, not the job title. They saw the man, the teacher, the mentor, the soul who had carried kindness through every door he walked through. Dr. Matthews placed a hand on Mr. Lewis's shoulder, the gesture small but powerful. "I remember," he said, voice thick with memory, "the day I failed my exam, you stayed after school and told me failure wasn't final. You said it was the universe's way of testing whether I was willing to fight for what mattered. You told me I was meant for something greater." He paused, tears threatening to fall. "You were right." Mr. Lewis chuckled softly, the kind of laugh that carried a lifetime of both pain and grace. "You fought for it," he said. "You made me proud, son." The crowd was quiet again, but it wasn't the same silence as before. This time it was reverent. It was the silence that follows truth, the kind that makes people question themselves. One nurse stepped forward timidly. "Mr. Lewis," she whispered, I'm so sorry." Her words trembled, but they were sincere. Others began to nod, their faces heavy with regret. He nodded back, his voice steady. "We all make mistakes," he said. "What matters is what we learn from them." Dr. Matthews looked around the room, his eyes scanning every face. "Let today be the day you remember that," he said quietly. "Titles don't make people valuable, character does." There it was, the lesson, spoken plainly, yet echoing deep. The janitor and the surgeon stood side by side, two lives forever connected by a classroom long gone, and a moment that had just rewritten the way everyone in that lobby saw the world. Mr. Lewis picked up his mop, but now the gesture felt different. He wasn't a janitor cleaning a spill, he was a man reclaiming his dignity. Dr. Matthews stood beside him, watching with respect, not pity. The lobby that had been heavy with tension only minutes ago now felt lighter, as if the walls themselves had exhaled. Still, Mr. Lewis didn't stay long. He nodded once, quietly, and began to walk away. The crowd parted for him this time, not because of authority, but out of reverence. As he disappeared down the hall, the sound of his footsteps faded, replaced by the rhythmic hum of the hospital coming back to life. But something had changed in that space, something that wouldn't wash away. The staff who had once overlooked him now carried the weight of what they'd seen. They had witnessed a man stripped of status, yet filled with more dignity than anyone in that building. Dr. Matthews stood still for a long moment, eyes following Mr. Lewis until he was gone. Then he whispered, almost to himself, "You taught me once that greatness isn't about what you earn, it's about what you give." And in that silent lobby, filled with guilt, grace, and newfound respect, every person there felt that truth settle into their bones. Because sometimes the greatest teachers aren't the ones with the titles. They're the ones who show you how to be human, even when the world refuses to see them. Later that night, the hospital hallways had fallen back into silence. The chaos, the shouting, the humiliation, all of it had melted away into the quiet hum of machines and the faint echo of footsteps on wax tile. The same floors that had witnessed shame hours ago now gleamed under the glow of fluorescent lights. And there, moving through the stillness, was Mr. Lewis. His mop glided in slow, careful strokes, the rhythm steady and patient, like a man reclaiming something the world had tried to take from him. His back was slightly bent, his pace unhurried, but his presence carried a different kind of weight now. The same man, the same uniform, but tonight, people saw him differently. A pair of nurses walked by, whispering softly. They didn't turn away this time. One of them paused, offering a quiet smile. "Evening, Mr. Lewis." He nodded, the corner of his mouth lifting just slightly, the kind of smile that didn't need to be big to be real. Down the hall, a young orderly who'd been there earlier during the confrontation caught his eye. He hesitated, then said, "Hey, sir, floors look great tonight." The words were simple, but behind them was respect, the kind of respect that isn't forced by position but earned through truth. Mr. Lewis didn't need thanks, but acknowledgement. That was something he hadn't felt in a long time. He kept working, his reflection moving along the polished floor like a ghost of who he used to be, the teacher, the mentor, the man who once stood in front of chalkboards instead of cleaning boards. His movements were methodical, but his mind wandered back to that moment earlier when Dr. Matthews had stood up for him, when truth had cracked open years of silence. He hadn't wanted a scene. He never did. But something about it felt like a circle closing, like life, for once, had chosen to make things right. In the break room, the tension from earlier had vanished. The staff gathered, their eyes downcast, not from shame anymore, but from reflection. Dr. Matthews stood at the front, still in his blood-specked scrubs, his hands clasped together. His voice was calm but carried that kind of conviction that demanded to be heard. From this day forward, he said, remember this, titles don't define greatness. Character does. His words hung in the air, settling deep in the hearts of everyone present. No one dared interrupt. They all knew he was right. He looked around the room at the nurses, the techs, even the guards standing near the door. That man you dragged out earlier, he continued, wasn't just a janitor. He was my teacher, the reason I ever wore this coat. He taught me not just science but respect for people, for work, for life. The security guards shifted awkwardly, their eyes lowered. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their silence was apology enough. And sometimes silence is the loudest kind of sorry. From that night on, something shifted in the hospital's air. It wasn't dramatic, no announcements, no grand gestures, just a quiet, collective change. When Mr. Lewis walked the halls now, people looked up. They saw him. They said his name. The small nods, the open doors, the greetings, each one a tiny redemption, a step toward what should have always been. The security guards made sure never to pass him without a polite nod. The nurses made sure to save him a cup of coffee when they brewed a fresh pot. These weren't favors. They were acknowledgements, acts of respect. As the hours dragged into midnight, Dr. Matthews found himself walking those same halls, exhaustion weighing on his shoulders. His surgery had gone well, but his mind wasn't on the patient anymore. It was on his teacher. He followed the faint sound of the mop swishing over the tiles until he saw him again, alone in the hallway, bathed in the blue light from the emergency exit sign. Mr. Lewis turned when he heard the footsteps. His face softened. Long night? He asked. Matthews smiled wearily. Yeah, but a good one. He stepped closer, hesitating for a moment like a student standing before his teacher again. You still teaching? He asked, the question carrying more meaning than it seemed. Mr. Lewis paused, then gave that same faint smile, the one that always hinted at wisdom beyond words. Always, he said, just different classrooms now. He dipped the mop again, the soft swoosh filling the space between them. Every floor's a lesson if you know how to see it. The doctor chuckled softly, shaking his head. You haven't changed a bit. Neither have you, Mr. Lewis replied, still trying to fix what's broken. He wrung out the mop, glancing up at him. You did good today, not because of what you said, but because you stood up when it mattered. Matthews swallowed, emotion catching in his throat. I just did what you taught me, he said quietly. You always said character shows when no one's watching. Mr. Lewis smiled, the kind of smile that carried both pride and pain. And tonight, people watched. They learned something they'll never forget. For a long moment, they stood there in silence, two men from different worlds, joined by a shared past and a simple truth. One had taught in classrooms with broken chairs, the other healed in operating rooms with million-dollar machines. But at their core, they were the same, both servants in their own way, both driven by something deeper than recognition. Dr. Matthews finally sighed, looking at the clock. You should get some rest, he said. Mr. Lewis chuckled softly. These floors don't clean themselves, doctor. Matthews hesitated, then nodded respectfully. Good night, Mr. Lewis. Good night, son, he replied, and went back to work. As Matthews walked away, he glanced back one more time. The sight stayed with him, the mop gliding across the floor, the reflection of the lights shimmering on the polished tiles like ripples of redemption. Every stroke seemed to wipe away more than dirt. It erased the day's cruelty, the blindness, the arrogance that had filled those halls. It was as if the building itself was being cleansed, inside and out. Somewhere down the corridor, the intercom buzzed softly with a nurse's announcement. But in that moment, the only sound that mattered was the steady rhythm of Mr. Lewis's mop. It was a rhythm of patience, of resilience, the quiet heartbeat of a man who had endured everything and still chose grace. And as the camera would fade out, the image would linger. Mr. Lewis, alone but not lonely, his silhouette moving beneath the glow of white light. The shine of the floor mirrored him, creating two versions of the same man, the janitor and the teacher, side by side. The reflection shimmered like a second chance, like life reminding him that even when the world tries to overlook you, truth always finds its way back into the light. Because dignity, once reclaimed, doesn't need applause. It just needs to be seen.